The door of the warehouse groaned open, and my sister stepped into the light. For one foolish heartbeat, I thought Sloane had come to save me. Then she looked past the rope around my wrists and asked, "Where's the recording, little sister?" That was the moment I understood. She had not come for me. She had come to make sure my father stayed dead. My husband skipped my father's funeral to be with his mistress. Then he texted, "Don't turn your grief into a public embarrassment." At 3 a.m., Dad messaged me, "I'm alive. Don't trust your sister. Come alone to the cemetery behind Black Ridge." My name is Mara Ellison, and before that night, I used to believe betrayal announced itself with shouting, slamming doors, or one ugly sentence a person could never take back. I was wrong. Some betrayals come wearing pearl earrings. Some kiss your cheek in church. Some call you sweetheart while sliding a knife under the table. I grew up outside Asheville, North Carolina, where the Blue Ridge Mountains made even ordinary mornings look like they belonged on a postcard. My father, Walter Ellison, built Ellison Ridge Development from a 2-room office, a used pickup truck, and a reputation so clean, people joked he could borrow money on a handshake. He was 65, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and stubborn in the way Southern men can be when they mistake silence for strength. After my mother died, he raised me with casseroles from church ladies, Saturday pancakes, and lessons about keeping your word even when no one was watching. I worked for his company too, not in the boardroom, but close enough to know its heartbeat. I handled community outreach, charity builds, neighborhood meetings, all the human pieces that turned blueprints into homes. Dad used to say, "Mara, a building isn't worth much if people don't trust the hands that raised it." Sloane Ellison came into our family when she was 13. Her mother had died, and Dad, who had known her family for years, took her in. He gave her a bedroom, a college fund, a last name, and eventually a position at the company. To me, she was my sister, not half, not adopted, just mine. She called me little sister, even after I turned 36, even after I married Graham Whitlock and moved into the old Whitlock estate. She knew how to smooth my hair back when I cried. She knew exactly which memories of my mother still hurt. I trusted her with the kind of trust you do not inspect because you think it was built before suspicion had a name. Then there was Graham. Graham Whitlock was 39, handsome in that careful, polished way men learn when they have more family history than money. His mother, Vivian Whitlock, came from one of those old Southern families that spoke softly, dressed perfectly, and treated decline like a rumor too impolite to confirm. When Graham courted me, he knew every right thing to say. He admired my father, he praised my work, he held doors, remembered hymns, and told me that a woman like me deserved peace. After the wedding, he suggested we move into Whitlock Estate for a while. Vivian was getting older, he said. The house was too large for one woman. We could save money before buying our own place. It sounded reasonable. That is how the worst cages work. They never look like cages when you first walk in. Whitlock Estate sat behind iron gates and ancient oaks, with white columns out front and family portraits lining the hall like judges. Vivian welcomed me with sweet tea, linen napkins, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Mara, dear," she told me my first Sunday there, adjusting the collar of my dress before church. "Your father's money may open doors, but manners decide whether you belong inside." I laughed softly because I thought she was teasing. She was not. Over the next weeks, she corrected how I set a table, how I greeted guests, how loudly I laughed at dinner, how often I mentioned work. Graham began coming home later. His phone stayed face down beside his plate. When I asked if something was wrong, he kissed my forehead and said, "Don't go borrowing trouble, honey." Sloane visited often. She would sit beside me on the porch swing, hold my hand and whisper, "Marriage is politics, little sister. You can't cry your way through every room." So I tried harder. I wore the softer colors Vivian liked. I stopped questioning Graham's late nights. I smiled through dinners where I felt less like a wife and more like an audition. I did not know then that my father had already found the first crack in the wall. I did not know signatures were being used without his permission. Contracts were being shifted, and my husband's name was beginning to appear where it did not belong. All I knew was that every room in that beautiful house seemed to grow smaller when I entered it. Some cages do not rattle, they shine. Whitlock Estate did not feel haunted at first. It smelled of lemon oil, old wood, and gardenias Vivian kept in silver bowls near the front hall. Morning light fell through tall windows and turned the staircase gold. From the outside, it looked like the kind of home women in magazines smiled inside. But by the third week, I understood something. A beautiful house can still teach you to lower your voice. Vivian Whitlock believed in rules no one had written down. Napkins belonged folded across the lap before the first prayer ended. Sweet tea was poured from the right. Guests from First Grace Community Church were greeted by last name unless invited otherwise. Family business was never discussed where help, neighbors, or emotional women could hear. "Mara, dear," she said one Thursday evening as I carried green beans to the dining room, "you hold a serving dish like you're bringing food to a tailgate." Graham chuckled under his breath. Not loudly. Never loudly. That was worse. Vivian smiled as if she had given me a charm bracelet instead of a cut. In this family, presentation matters. People decide what kind of woman you are before they taste the bite. I set the dish down, careful not to let my hand shake. Dinner was roast chicken, cornbread, mashed potatoes, and peach cobbler cooling near the window. The kind of meal that should have made a house feel warm, but every bite sat in my throat like a stone. Graham sat across from me in a navy dress shirt, phone face down near his knife. It buzzed twice. He ignored it once, then excused himself before dessert. "Work," he said, touching my shoulder as he passed. "Your dad's got me looking over some development files." My father had brought Graham into Ellison Ridge Development after the wedding. Not as an executive, not yet. Just a learner, Dad said. A man should understand the weight of a company before he touches its steering wheel. At the time, I was proud. I thought Dad trusted my husband. Vivian watched Graham leave, then turned her eyes to me. "A wife must learn the difference between being included and interfering." "I only asked where he was going," I said. "And that," she replied softly, "is often how interference introduces itself." The next morning was Sunday. I wore a pale blue dress because Vivian had once said blue looked less ambitious on me. At church, she introduced me to a woman who smelled like powder and expensive perfume. "This is Mara," she would say. "Walter Ellison's daughter, Graham's wife." Never just Mara. Always belonging to a man before I could belong to myself. People were kind, mostly. They asked about my father, my work, whether Graham and I planned to have children. Vivian answered half the questions for me, laughing gently, placing one hand on my arm like a ribbon tied around a package. After service, Sloan found me near the coffee table in the fellowship hall. She looked perfect, as always. Camel coat, soft waves, small gold cross at her throat. She hugged me before I could say a word. "You look tired, little sister." "I'm fine." "No, you're performing fine." She lowered her voice. "There's a difference." That nearly broke me. I told her about Vivian's comments, Graham's late nights, the way the house seemed to watch me. Sloan listened with wet eyes and a steady hand on my back. "Marriage is politics," she said, "especially in families like the Whitlocks. Don't give Vivian the satisfaction of seeing you fold." "You think she wants me to fail?" Sloan glanced toward the church doors, where Vivian was laughing with two women from the garden committee. I think some women build their pride out of making younger women feel small. It sounded like loyalty, so I leaned on it. That was a cruel genius of Sloan. She never pushed me away from the truth. She stood close enough to point at it, then quietly turned it in the direction she needed. By late October, Graham's absences had become routine. He blamed site visits, county meetings, investor dinners, late calls with vendors. When he came home, he smelled faintly of bourbon and rain, even on dry nights. Once, I saw a message flash across his screen. P. Vance. Need access before Walter reviews the revised file. I asked who Preston Vance was texting about. Graham's face changed for less than a second. Then he smiled. Business, honey. Nothing that needs to sit on your shoulders. My father's company is my business, too. He leaned back, studying me like I had spoken out of turn at someone else's table. Your father gave me a chance, Mara. Don't make it harder by acting like I stole one. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was cruel, because it sounded rehearsed. That night, Vivian stopped outside my bedroom door while I was folding laundry. She did not knock. She simply entered, holding a white blouse I had left downstairs. Women in this family don't unravel in public, she said. I haven't unraveled. No, she replied, laying the blouse on the bed. But you have started asking questions with your face. I looked at her then, really looked. Behind the pearls, behind the soft lipstick, behind the careful Southern grace, there was something hard and watchful. A woman can be lonely in a full dining room. I learned that at Whitlock Estate, sitting beside a husband who touched my hand only when someone else could see it. My father never raised his voice when he was angry. That was how people knew to be afraid. Walter Ellison could sit behind his desk, hands folded, gray eyes steady, and make a grown man sweat without using a single ugly word. He believed shouting was for men who had already lost control of the room. So when Owen Brooks called me one Tuesday afternoon and asked if I had spoken with Dad lately, I knew something was wrong. Owen had worked as my father's executive assistant for 6 years. He was younger than most people in that building, but he had the calm eyes of a man who noticed everything and wasted nothing. If Owen sounded careful, there was a reason. Is he sick? I asked. No, ma'am, not sick. He paused. He's reviewing some contracts. That was all he said, but I heard what he did not. I drove to Ellison Ridge Development before lunch. The office sat on a rise outside Asheville, with stone pillars, wide windows, and a view of the mountains Dad loved more than any painting. Inside, people greeted me warmly. They always had. To them, I was still Walter's daughter, the woman who organized volunteer builds and Christmas food drives. But that day, the air felt tight. Dad's office door was half closed. Through the gap, I saw Graham sitting across from him, one ankle crossed over his knee, trying to look relaxed. He was failing. A folder lay open on Dad's desk. I'm asking a simple question, Dad said. Why does my electronic signature appear on an approval I never gave? Graham gave a soft laugh. Walter, with all due respect, you sign dozens of things a week. It could have been routine. Dad did not blink. It was dated while I was speaking at First Grace. Graham's smile thinned. I stepped back before they saw me. Not because I wanted to eavesdrop, but because something in my stomach told me the truth was still undressed. Owen appeared beside me with 2 cups of coffee. His face was neutral, but his knuckles were white around the cardboard tray. Miss Ellison, he said softly. Maybe give them a minute. That was the first time in years he had called me Miss Ellison instead of Mara. Inside the office, Dad's voice stayed low. 2 subcontract packages were redirected through a shell vendor tied to Preston Vance. Preston has worked with this company for years, Graham said. And that history is the only reason I'm asking questions before I call attorneys. A chair scraped. Graham walked out a moment later. When he saw me, surprise flashed across his face before he covered it with warmth. Mara, honey, what are you doing here? I came to see Dad. Bad timing. He kissed my cheek. He's in one of his moods. One of his moods. As if my father's integrity were a weather problem. Graham squeezed my shoulder, then walked away toward the elevator. His shoes made clean, confident sounds against the tile, but his jaw was tight. Dad let me in after a few minutes. He had already closed the folder. Is everything okay? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. There are some irregularities. Nothing for you to carry yet. Dad. I mean it, sweetheart. He only called me sweetheart when he was protecting me from something he thought he could handle alone. That evening, Dad contacted Marjorie Bell, our family attorney. Marjorie had known him since my mother was alive. She handled estate documents, voting rights, trust amendments, and the kind of paperwork families only understand after someone dies or someone gets greedy. I did not know then that Dad asked her to review everything: the living trust, company shares, voting control, beneficiary protections, and every clause that could keep Graham Whitlock away from Ellison Ridge if something happened. But someone else heard enough. Sloan had come by the office late that afternoon, carrying a stack of donor packets from a housing fundraiser. She passed the conference room just as Dad said my name. Mara needs to be protected, he told Marjorie over speakerphone. Whatever happens, she controls my voting interests. No spouse, no in-law, no temporary trustee unless Marjorie approves it directly. Sloan stopped walking. Later, she would say she had not meant to listen. Maybe that was true for the first 10 seconds, but hurt has ears. She heard Dad say my name again, not hers, mine. She heard him speak of control, inheritance, protection, legacy. She heard the final shape of what she had feared since she was 13 years old. Walter Ellison had given her a home, but he was leaving me the keys. That night, while Vivian hosted a garden committee dinner at Whitlock Estate, Graham took a call on the back terrace. I watched him through the French doors. His face was pale under the porch light. I heard only one sentence. Preston, he's bringing in Belle. Across the room, Vivian kept smiling as she poured coffee into china cups. Sloan sat beside me, her hand resting over mine. You look worried, little sister, she whispered. I almost told her everything. Instead, I squeezed her fingers and said, I think something is wrong. Her eyes softened. I'm sure Graham will explain when he can. And at the time, I thought she was comforting me. Now I know she was measuring how much I knew. Resentment does not need a match when pride is already soaked in gasoline. The call came on a Monday morning while I was standing barefoot in the Whitlock kitchen, waiting for coffee to finish brewing. Rain tapped against the windows. Vivian's silver clock ticked above the stove. Somewhere upstairs, Graham's shower was running, steady and ordinary, as if the world had not already begun to split open. My phone buzzed across the counter. Hank Morrison. Dad's driver had worked for him nearly 20 years. Hank did not call me before 7 unless something was broken, bleeding, or burning. Mara? His voice sounded far away, torn open by panic. It's your father. The mug slipped from my hand before he finished. It hit the floor and shattered. Coffee spreading across the white towel like a dark stain. What happened? The Parkway, Hank gasped. Blue Ridge Parkway, near the overlook past Black Ridge. The SUV went off the curve. Fire crews are here. I don't know what happened. I woke up in the ditch. I grabbed the counter to stay upright. Where's Dad? Silence. Not empty silence. The kind where someone is trying to decide whether mercy is kinder than truth. Hank, I said, my voice breaking. Where's my father? They said the vehicle burned too fast. Behind me, Graham walked in wearing a dress shirt, his hair still damp. He looked at the broken mug, then at my face. What is it? I could barely say the words. Dad's been in an accident. For 1 second, his expression froze. Not grief, not shock, calculation. Then it vanished. Oh God, he said too late. Mara, I'm so sorry. Vivian entered with her robe tied perfectly at the waist. I remember that detail because grief makes strange things sharp. What's happened? She asked. When Graham told her, she pressed a hand to her chest and whispered, How dreadful. Then she looked at me. Mara, dear, sit down before you make yourself ill. I did not sit. I drove toward the mountains with Graham beside me, though he spent half the ride texting. The closer we got to the parkway, the more police lights cut through the rain. Fire trucks blocked the road. Burned metal lay twisted beyond the guardrail. Hank sat in the back of an ambulance, gray-faced, wrapped in a blanket. He looked older than he had the day before. I'm sorry, he kept saying. I don't remember. I had coffee, then the road started swimming. At the time, I thought he blamed himself. Later, we learned his blood carried enough sedative to knock a man sideways. A deputy told me my father had not survived. His voice was careful, professional, tired. He said identification would take time. He said the fire had been severe. He said words people say when they have learned to stand outside another person's collapse. Graham put an arm around me only when the deputy looked our way. By afternoon, everything moved faster than grief should allow. Malcolm Devereaux from Devereaux Funeral Home called before I had even left the sheriff's office. He spoke with the polished sorrow of a man who had practiced comfort in front of mirrors. Mrs. Whitlock, he said, given the condition of the remains, I advise against a viewing. Your father was a dignified man. Let us preserve that dignity. I wanted to scream that dignity did not belong to Malcolm Devereaux. It belonged to my father. But Vivian took the phone from my shaking hand. She understands, Vivian said. The family appreciates your discretion. The family. As if I were not the family. By the next day, papers had appeared. Cremation authorization, identification summaries, transport records, forms with dates, initials, and official stamps, and Sloane's signature. She stood beside me in the funeral home's private room, wearing black, her eyes swollen red. On the table sat a bronze urn with a small engraved plate. Walter James Ellison. Beloved father, builder, friend. I stared at the words until they stopped looking like language. I signed because you couldn't, Sloane whispered, taking my hand. You were in no condition, little sister. I don't remember anyone asking me. You were barely breathing. Malcolm bowed his head. Miss Ellison acted in the family's best interests. Under the circumstances, speed was a mercy. Speed was a mercy. That phrase should have angered me. Instead, I folded over the urn and sobbed so hard my ribs hurt. Sloane held me. Graham stood near the door, checking his phone when he thought no one noticed. Vivian dabbed her eyes with the handkerchief that stayed dry. I carried my father's ashes home in both hands, terrified I might drop what was left of him. I did not know the urn was a lie. I did not know the signature beside my sister's name had helped bury a man who was still breathing. Grief made me blind. Their paperwork made it legal. First Grace Community Church had never looked so full. People stood along the back wall because every pew was taken. Men from Dad's construction crews came in clean shirts, holding their caps in both hands. Women from the food pantry cried openly near the aisle. County officials, pastors, subcontractors, neighbors. They all came to honor Walter Ellison. My father had built more than houses. He had built trust. And trust fills a church differently than money does. A large frame photograph of him stood near the altar, surrounded by white lilies and mountain laurel. In the picture, Dad was smiling in front of a habitat build, sleeves rolled up, one hand resting on a stack of lumber. I kept staring at that hand. I had held it when I was little. I had watched it sign birthday cards, donation checks, building permits, and notes he tucked into my lunchbox after Mom died. Now everyone said those hands were ash. Sloan stood on my left, dressed in black wool, her arm looped through mine. Every few minutes, she leaned close and whispered, "Breathe, little sister." On my right, Vivian sat straight-backed in the front pew, face composed beneath a small black hat. She looked less like a mourner than a woman attending a social obligation she intended to survive with grace. Graham was not there. At first, I told myself he had stepped outside to take a call. Then the first hymn ended. Then the pastor began speaking. Then one of Dad's foremen stood and cried through a story about Walter paying a worker's medical bill without telling anyone. Still no Graham. My phone buzzed once inside my purse. Emergency meeting. Handling something for the company. I'll be there soon. No apology. No I love you. No I'm sorry I'm not beside you while they speak my father-in-law's name like a prayer. Just handling something. I felt Sloane's fingers tighten around mine. Is it Graham? I nodded. Her face filled with the kind of sympathy that makes you feel seen and ashamed at the same time. Men like him don't always know how to stand still in grief. Vivian leaned slightly toward us without moving her eyes from the pulpit. Lower your voice, Mara, dear. I had not said a word. After the service, the fellowship hall filled with coffee, casseroles, deviled eggs, pound cake, and the soft murmur of people trying to comfort without reopening the wound. I stood beside the urn on a skirted table and accepted condolences until every sentence blurred. Your father was a good man. He helped my son get work. He saved our mortgage project. He never made people beg. Each kindness should have warmed me. Instead, they pressed harder against the empty place beside me where my husband should have been. Near the hallway, two women from the office stopped talking when I turned. One was Beth from accounting. The other, a project coordinator named Jenny, looked like she had swallowed glass. What? I asked. Beth shook her head. Nothing, Mara. Oh, please don't do that to me today. Jenny's eyes filled. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. The photo was grainy, taken from across a hotel lobby. Graham stood near a marble column with his arm around a young woman in a cream-colored dress. Her hand rested on his chest. Behind them was a sign for a Charleston waterfront hotel. The timestamp was from that morning, during my father's memorial service. Her name is Lena Pierce, Jenny whispered. She used to process insurance files for Preston Vance. The room tilted. For a moment, all I could hear was the clink of coffee cups and someone laughing softly near the dessert table. Ordinary sounds. Cruel sounds. Sloan appeared beside me. Mara? I handed her the phone. Her face changed beautifully. Shock, then anger, then sisterly pain. If grief had an actress, it would have looked like Sloan in that hallway. Oh, honey, she whispered. I walked straight to Vivian. She was standing beneath a framed photo of last year's church fundraiser, smiling at a woman from the garden committee. When she saw my face, her smile tightened. "Where's your son?" Her eyes flicked toward the hall. "This is not the place." "It is exactly the place. My father is being mourned 10 feet away from us." Vivian stepped closer, lowering her voice until it was smooth as butter and twice as cold. "Men under pressure sometimes need room to breathe. A wise wife does not turn private disappointment into public spectacle." Private disappointment. My father was dead. My husband was in Charleston with another woman. And somehow, I was the one in danger of being embarrassing. Sloane took my elbow gently. "Come with me, little sister." I let her guide me outside to the church steps, where the mountain air cut through my black dress. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my wedding ring into the parking lot. I wanted my father alive long enough to tell me I was not crazy for feeling the world had turned against me. Sloane wrapped both arms around me. "Don't let them see you fall apart," she whispered. I cried into her shoulder. Back then, I thought she was holding me together. Now I know she was checking how close I was to breaking. A bad husband breaks your heart. A silent family teaches him where to aim. I went back to my father's house because I could not bear another night under Vivian Whitlock's roof. Graham had not come home. He sent one message after midnight. "Still handling things. Don't wait up." Don't wait up. As if I were a wife annoyed by a late meeting, not a daughter who had stood beside a fake smiling mother-in-law while strangers whispered about my husband in Charleston. Dad's house sat at the edge of a quiet road outside Asheville, tucked behind maple trees that had turned copper and red. The porch light was still on. Hank used to tease Dad about leaving it burning all night, and Dad always said, "A house should look like it expects somebody home." That sentence nearly took my knees out. Inside, everything smelled like him. Cedar, coffee, old leather, the faint cinnamon he sprinkled over oatmeal, even though he claimed he hated sweet things. I placed the urn on the kitchen table. For a long time, I just sat across from it. The bronze caught the light above the sink. Walter James Ellison, beloved father, builder, friend. I traced the engraved letters once, then pulled my hand back as if the metal had burned me. "You should have let me see you," I whispered. The house did not answer. Around 2, rain started again. I went through drawers because grief makes a person search for proof. Old receipts, a pocket knife, a stack of Christmas cards tied with string, a photo of Dad, Mom, Sloane, and me at Lake Lure when I was 12 and Sloane was 16. Sloane had her arm around my shoulders in that picture. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. She had been the one who sat with me when Mom died. She had braided my hair before school when Dad forgot picture day. She had taught me how to walk into a room full of adults without looking scared. If Graham had betrayed me, that was one kind of pain. But Sloane? No. I would not even let the thought form. At 3:07 a.m., my phone lit up. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the first line. "Mara, it's Dad." The air left my lungs. Another message came before I could move. "I'm alive. Don't trust Graham. Don't trust Sloane either. Black Ridge Cemetery. Come alone." I read it once, then again, until the words stopped being words and became a hand reaching out of a grave. My first thought was that someone was cruel enough to use my father's name to break me. My second thought was worse. The message sounded like him. Short, direct, no wasted comfort. Dad never dressed truth in lace, especially when danger was near. I stood so fast the chair scraped backward and hit the floor. My hands shook, but not from fear alone. Hope is not soft when it arrives after a funeral. It is violent. It tears through you. Don't trust Sloan either. That line kept pulsing in my head. I could imagine Graham lying, Vivian manipulating, Preston Vance moving money in dark corners. But Sloan had held me outside the church. Sloan had signed papers because I was supposedly too broken. Sloan had called me little sister. Little sister. Suddenly, the words felt less like love and more like a collar. The message said to come alone. I did not. My father had raised me gentle, not stupid. I called Owen Brooks. He answered on the fourth ring, voice rough with sleep but instantly alert when I said my name. Mara? What happened? I got a text, I whispered, from Dad. Silence. Then carefully, read it to me. I did. Owen did not laugh. He did not tell me grief was playing tricks. That was the first thing that kept me from falling apart. Do not go by yourself, he said. It says alone. If it's him, he'll forgive you. If it isn't, you'll live because you disobeyed. 20 minutes later, Owen's truck rolled up with the headlights off. I left Dad's house wearing jeans, boots, and the black coat I had worn to the memorial. The urn stayed on the table behind me, shining under the kitchen light like a lie I was not yet brave enough to name. Black Ridge Cemetery sat behind an old chapel no one used much anymore. Pines crowded the edges. Fog moved low over the grass. Owen parked down the road and let me walk ahead while he stayed hidden near the tree line. My phone buzzed again. By the stone wall. I turned. A figure stepped out from behind the old cemetery wall, one hand braced against the mossy stone. For half a second, I could not understand what I was seeing. His face was bruised. His coat was torn. Dried blood marked one side of his forehead. He looked thinner, older, almost carved out of pain. But his eyes were my father's. Mata, he said. I ran to him. Dad caught me with a sound that was half groan, half sob. I held him so hard I felt him flinch, and that made me cry harder, because dead men do not flinch. You're alive, I kept saying. Dad, you're alive. He pressed his mouth against my hair. They tried to kill me, he whispered. And if they find out I lived, they'll try again. And I pulled back, shaking. Who? His eyes moved past me, toward the dark road, toward the town where my husband slept in another woman's hotel room and my sister wore grief like Sunday pearls. Not here, he said. But listen to me, sweetheart. He gripped my hand with what strength he had left. They weren't just trying to kill me, Mara. They were trying to inherit your silence. Owen came out of the trees with a flashlight in one hand and a pistol he did not raise in the other. Dad saw him and almost smiled. Good. She didn't come alone. Oh, you taught me better, I said, though my voice cracked around every word. Owen helped him behind the cemetery wall, where the wind could not cut as hard. Up close, my father looked worse. His left cheek was swollen purple. One sleeve of his coat had been ripped open and wrapped badly around his forearm. His lips were split from cold and thirst. I wanted to ask 100 questions. Dad answered the only one that mattered first. The brakes were tampered with. Owen went still. Dad leaned against a stone, breathing through pain. Hank drank coffee before we left. Said it tasted bitter. 10 minutes later, he was slurring. I told him to pull over, but we were already on the curve. The SUV went over, I whispered. It hit hard. I don't remember all of it. Door came loose. I was thrown clear before the fire took the vehicle. He closed his eyes. If I'd still been inside, they would have gotten what they wanted. I gripped his hand tighter. A hunting dog had found him first, he said. Then, an old mountain man named Silas Boone, who lived part of the year in a cabin off an old logging road. Silas had dragged him out of the rain, cleaned his wounds, and kept him warm with coffee so black Dad joked it could strip paint. He wanted to call an ambulance, Dad said. I almost let him. Then I heard voices near the wreck site. What voices? Men looking for something they didn't find. Me. The word sat between us even before he said it. They needed me dead fast, Dad continued. Not just dead, legally dead. Cremated, filed, sealed. Once that happened, they could move on you. Owen's jaw tightened. Power of attorney, trust access, estate pressure, Dad nodded. I thought of Graham's gentle hands, Vivian's dry handkerchief, Sloane's signature on the cremation papers. Why not call Sheriff Hargrove? I asked. Because a wounded man claiming his own funeral was staged sounds crazy without proof. And if the wrong deputy made one wrong call, Preston Vance would know I was alive before sunrise. That name landed cold. Preston. Dad looked at me. Graham had access he should never have touched. Vivian had motive to protect him. Preston had the money trail. And Sloane, he stopped. I did not want him to finish. But truth does not become kinder because you close your eyes. She knew my schedule, he said. She knew I changed routes that morning. Nobody outside the office knew I was taking the Parkway. My chest hurt. Sloane signed the cremation papers. Dad's face folded with grief, not surprise. Owen looked toward the road. We need to move him. He took us to an old lakeside cabin Ellison Ridge once used for project storage before the county changed zoning rules. It smelled of dust, pine boards, and cold metal. Owen had blankets in his truck, bottled water, a first aid kit, and the steady manner of someone who had already decided panic was useless. Dad laid down on a narrow cot and caught my wrist before I could step away. Mara, listen. You go back before dawn. No. Yes. They'll hurt you. They'll hurt you first if they think you know. His eyes sharpened through the bruising. You have to let them believe you're grieving too hard to see straight. I can't sit at that table with them. You can, he said, because you're my daughter. That almost broke me worse than the urn. Before I left, Dad pulled me close. Don't accuse. Don't threaten. Don't sign anything. Cry if you have to. Let them mistake pain for weakness. Owen drove me back while the sky was turning gray. At Whitlock Estate, Vivian was already in the breakfast room, reading the paper beside untouched tea. Graham stood near the window, still in yesterday's clothes. Sloane sat at the table with red eyes and a cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders. 3 faces turned when I entered. Vivian's gaze moved over my coat, my muddy hem, my pale face. Did you sleep at all, Mara, dear? I looked at the woman who had helped bury an empty lie. At the husband who could kiss my forehead while counting my father's shares. At the sister who knew the word little could be used like a leash. Then I lowered my eyes. No, I whispered. I don't think I can sleep anymore. Sloane rose and wrapped her arms around me. I let her. My tears came easily because some of them were real. But for the first time in my life, I chose where they fell. By noon, Graham placed the papers in front of me like he was setting down a glass of water. Durable Power of Attorney. The title looked clean, helpful even. That was the trick with dangerous documents. They rarely arrived wearing teeth. You don't have to decide everything right now, Graham said, his voice low and tender for Vivian's benefit. This just lets me handle the estate details until you're steady again. I stared at the pen beside my hand. Vivian sat across from me in a cream sweater and pearls, watching like a judge pretending to be family. Sloane stood behind my chair, rubbing my shoulders. It's only temporary, little sister. Dad will want someone protecting you. Dad. The word hit me so hard I nearly looked up. Instead, I let my fingers tremble. I reached for the coffee cup and tipped it just enough to spill across the lower corner of the first page. Oh, I whispered. I'm sorry. Graham's jaw tightened before his smile returned. It's fine. I'll print another. Vivian sighed softly. Grief makes even simple things difficult. That afternoon, she drove me to a psychiatrist in Asheville, a friend from some charity board. Dr. Weller had soft hands, framed degrees, and eyes that kept moving to Vivian before every question. Vivian answered more than I did. Mar has been saying strange things, she explained, about water not really being gone. I looked down at my lap. Dr. Weller asked if I had slept, if I had eaten, if I felt unsafe, if I had thoughts of harming myself. No, I said. Vivian touched my knee. Honey, you don't have to be brave here. Honey. Vivian had never called me that before. By the time we left, I understood the shape of their plan. They were not trying to kill me first. They were trying to make my words unusable. A widow can be pitied. A daughter can be comforted. But an unstable woman can be managed. Back at the estate, I found a small bottle of sedatives in my coat pocket. My name was not on it. I took a photo, then left it exactly where I found it. Later, Owen called from a blocked number. I answered in the pantry with the door cracked. They're building a mental health record, I whispered. I know, he said. Hank's blood work came back. Sedative present. Not enough for an arrest alone, but it matters. And what about Dad? Moved, resting, angry. That made me almost laugh. Before dinner, Sloane came to my room holding a folder. I found something in Dad's files, she said. An amendment. It says if you're emotionally impaired, I can serve as a temporary trustee. She looked heartbroken. She had always been good at that. I took a folder, saw language my father would never use, and felt my stomach turn cold. The paper wanted to steal my future with my sister's hands. You do that for me? I asked. Her eyes shone. I'd do anything for you. I wondered how many lies in history had begun with those exact words. That night, Graham knocked on my door without waiting for an answer. The crisis line may call tomorrow. Mom was worried after what you said about your father. What did I say? He sat beside me. That he isn't really dead? I let my face empty. I don't remember. His relief was quick, too quick. For a few seconds, I saw the man beneath the husband. Not charming, not patient, just hungry. They didn't need a coffin for me. They only needed a diagnosis. If you're listening to Mara's story right now, tell me in the comments what you would advise her to do before signing anything. Leave a like if you believe a woman's grief should never be used as a weapon against her. Because what waits behind the next closed door will test every ounce of courage she has left. I slept in a locked room that night, with a chair under the knob and my phone under my pillow. Not because I felt safe, because I finally understood the rules of their game. They wanted me fragile, confused, grateful for control. So I gave them shaking hands at breakfast. I gave them red eyes at church. I gave Vivian silence when she corrected my dress, and Graham a weak smile when he called me honey. But inside, something had gone still. Not dead, still. Like a deer hearing a branch break in the woods. Like a woman learning the difference between being wounded and being hunted. I met Lena Pierce in the parking lot behind Marjorie Bell's office. I had gone there to drop off copies of the fake trustee amendment Sloan had handed me. Marjorie was out of town for a hearing, but her assistant promised to lock the folder in the fireproof cabinet until she returned. When I stepped outside, a woman was waiting beside my car. Cream coat, dark hair pinned low, sunglasses too large for the cloudy afternoon. I knew her before she said a word. Charleston had burned her face into my memory. "You have 5 seconds," I said, gripping my keys between my fingers. Lena lifted both hands. "I'm not here to fight you." "Oh, that's convenient, since you already helped humiliate me at my father's memorial." Her mouth tightened. Not with anger, with shame. "I know what that looked like." "It looked like my husband had his arm around you while I stood beside my father's urn." She looked away. For one sharp second, I wanted to hate her more than I hated Graham. It would have been easier, cleaner. A woman in a hotel lobby is a simpler villain than a husband smiling across your dinner table. But Lena's hands were shaking. "Graham used me," she said. "And now he's setting me up." I said nothing. She opened her purse slowly and pulled out a small envelope. "I used to process insurance documentation for Preston Vance's firm. Contract work. Nothing glamorous. Beneficiary updates, policy writers, corporate forms." "Why should I care?" "Well, because your father had an $8.4 million life insurance policy connected to a business continuity agreement. It was altered 2 weeks before the crash." When the world narrowed, she held out the envelope, but I did not take it yet. "Graham told me he was separated from you emotionally," she continued. "He said the marriage was over in every way except paperwork." I was stupid enough to believe him. "That explains the affair, not why you're here." Her eyes met mine then. Charleston was not just an affair. It was cover. A truck passed on the street, tires hissing over wet pavement. Lena lowered her voice. "Graham wanted people to think he was just a cheating husband. Messy, selfish, embarrassing. But while we were there, he met Preston in a private conference room at the hotel. I saw them with a laptop and a scanner. Graham had files from Ellison Ridge." My fingers went numb around the keys. "I recorded him," she said. "Not because I'm noble, because I heard my name." That honesty stopped me. She handed me her phone. The audio was rough, muffled by fabric, but Graham's voice came through clearly enough. "Once Walter is legally dead, Mara will sign anything. If the insurance file gets questioned, Lena processed the change. She's expendable." The parking lot seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Lena swallowed. "I wasn't his partner. I was his receipt." And I finally took the envelope. Inside were hotel invoices, screenshots of messages, a copy of a meeting room reservation under Preston's assistant, and timestamps that matched the morning of my father's memorial. I wanted to throw it all in her face. Instead, I asked, "Why now?" "Because Preston called yesterday, said I needed to remember what I'd signed." "I never signed anything illegal, Mara, but they can make it look like I did." She said my name carefully, as if she knew she had not earned the right to use it gently. I looked at the woman who had stood in a photograph with my husband's hand on her waist. I did not forgive her. I did not comfort her. I did not pretend pain became clean just because she brought evidence. But truth is not a gift you reject because the messenger is dirty. "Send everything to this number," I said, giving her Owen's secure contact. Her breath shook. "Will you tell the sheriff?" "When it's enough to hold." Lena nodded. As she turned to leave, she stopped. "For what it's worth, he talked about you like you were furniture he expected to inherit. That should have hurt. Instead, it hardened something in me. By sunset, Owen confirmed the meeting room, the policy change, and the timestamps. Graham had not gone to Charleston to escape grief. He had gone there to help turn my father's death into money. The photograph no longer looked like proof of an affair. It looked like the corner of a map. Betrayal wears many faces. Sometimes lipstick is only the mask. Owen did not raise his voice when he called me that evening. That was how I knew the evidence was bad. "Come to the old records room," he said. "Use the side entrance. Don't bring your car all the way up." Ellison Ridge Development had a storage wing most employees forgot existed. It smelled like printer toner, dust, and old carpet glue. Owen had cleared a table under a flickering light and laid everything out in neat stacks. Emails, access logs, insurance forms, funeral documents, my life dissected in folders. Lena's files had opened the first door. The $8.4 million policy was real, tied to a business continuity agreement Dad had approved years earlier for legitimate company protection. But 2 weeks before the crash, someone altered the beneficiary path through a vendor Preston Vance controlled. Not directly. Men like Preston rarely leave fingerprints on the front door. He built hallways, a consulting LLC, a management writer, a temporary payout clause, paperwork clean enough to fool anyone who did not know what Walter Ellison would never sign. Owen tapped one page. This change required digital authentication. Dad's signature? Yes, but the login came from Graham's assigned workstation. I stared at the printed log until the numbers blurred. Graham had sent encrypted signature files to Preston after midnight on a Thursday. That same night, he had come home, kissed my temple, and asked if I wanted to watch an old movie. I had fallen asleep beside a man who was stealing my father's name. Owen slid another folder toward me. Hank's full toxicology came back. Sedative present. Enough to impair response time. Enough to make a mountain road deadly. Enough to turn a loyal driver into a convenient explanation. Hank remembers coffee, Owen said. A disposable cup left in the vehicle. We're trying to locate it, but the fire destroyed most of the interior. Trying, I repeated. I was learning that justice was built on trying. Grief wanted thunder. Law wanted receipts. Then came Devereaux Funeral Home. Malcolm's record showed a cremation authorization with Sloan listed as family representative. The remains identification number did not match the accident report. A second file, partially deleted, belonged to an unidentified man from another county. My hand went cold on the table. That urn, Owen did not soften the answer, was not your father. And for a moment, I could not breathe. Not because I had believed the ashes were Dad anymore. I had seen him alive. I had held him. But I had cried over that urn. I had apologized to it. I had carried it like the last weight of my father's body. They had not only faked his death, they had choreographed my mourning. I turned the page and saw Sloan's signature. Clean, elegant, familiar. The same handwriting that had signed birthday cards. The same S she used on notes she left in my lunch when I was little. The same hand that had brushed hair from my face while calling me little sister. There's more, Owen said quietly. I almost told him to stop. He opened the final folder. Sloan's badge had accessed Dad's private office after the memorial at 9:42 p.m. Her credentials copied trust documents to an external drive. The next morning, the fake amendment appeared, naming her temporary trustee if I became mentally impaired. My chest felt hollow. A stranger can wound you. Family knows where you do not wear armor. She knew, I said. Owen looked at me with the terrible respect people give you when they refuse to lie for your comfort. Yes. I walked to the small window at the end of the room. Outside, the mountains were black against the last strip of orange sky. Somewhere beyond them, my father was hidden and hurt because people he loved had turned his own legacy into bait. My phone buzzed. Sloan, thinking of you tonight. I know you're scared. Remember, I'm here. Always. Always. I read it twice, then set the phone face down. Owen asked, "What do you want to do?" That question mattered. He did not say what Walter wanted. He did not say what the sheriff needed. He asked me. I looked back at the table, at every paper cut laid bare. "We don't confront them," I said. "Not yet." Owen nodded once. "They think I'm breaking," I continued. "Let them. Broken women get underestimated." That night, I drove back to Whitlock Estate with Sloane's message still unanswered. Vivian was waiting in the parlor. Graham stood near the fireplace. Sloane sat on the sofa, eyes soft with concern. 3 traps in one room. I stepped inside, lowered my shoulders, and let my voice tremble. "I don't want to be alone tonight." Sloane opened her arms, and God help me, I walked into them. The first warning came from Hank. He called Owen from a gas station payphone outside Blackridge because he no longer trusted his own cell. His voice was thin, scraped raw by fear and guilt. "There's a black pickup near the Lake Road," he said. "Same truck circled twice yesterday, no plates on the front." Owen did not waste time asking if Hank was sure. Men like Hank Morrison spend half their lives behind a windshield. They remember vehicles the way some people remembered faces. By then, Dad had been moved from the lakeside cabin to a smaller maintenance shed deeper in Ellison Ridge property. He hated every second of hiding. Even bruised, feverish, and stitched badly across one shoulder, Walter Ellison did not know how to be helpless. "I should go to Hargrove myself," he told Owen. "And say what?" Owen replied. "That your funeral was fake, while Malcolm Devereaux's paperwork says otherwise? Preston will know before you finish your statement." Dad cursed under his breath. That was how Owen knew he had won. The storm rolled in after dark, a hard Blue Ridge rain, the kind that hammered roofs and turned red clay into grease. Owen decided to move him before the pickup returned with more men. Hank drove the first vehicle, an old county truck with a cracked bumper. Owen followed in a dark SUV, with Dad lying across the back seat under a moving blanket. They kept the headlights low until the road twisted beneath the pines. Dad called me once before they left. I was in the Whitlock parlor, sitting across from Vivian, while she sorted invitation cards for a church luncheon no one grieving should have been expected to care about. My phone vibrated inside my pocket. I did not touch it. Vivian looked up. "Something important, Mara dear?" Her voice was soft. Her eyes were not. "No," I said. "Probably a condolence text." Graham stood by the fireplace with the bourbon he had not earned. Sloane was near the window, pretending to read, though she had not turned a page in 10 minutes. My phone buzzed again. And again. Every sound felt like a match struck in a dry room. On the mountain road, as Owen later told me, the black pickup appeared behind them, just past the old quarry turnoff. No headlights at first. Only a shape keeping distance in the rain. Then the light snapped on. Hank accelerated. The county truck fishtailed once, recovered, then took the lower road toward the abandoned West Project. Owen stayed behind him, using the SUV as a shield. Dad tried to sit up. Owen barked, "Stay down, Mr. Ellison. I know these roads better than you. You also currently look like a man who lost a fight with a logging truck." The dad dropped back with an angry breath. The pickup came closer, bright beams filling Owen's rearview mirror. It tapped the SUV's bumper once. Not hard enough to wreck them, hard enough to send a message. Hank swerved ahead, tires spitting gravel near the ditch. In Vivian's parlor, She set down a cream envelope and smiled at me. Secrets make women age badly, Mara dear. My heart stopped. Sloane looked up from her book. Graham watched me over the rim of his glass. I forced a small, broken laugh. Then grief must be ruining me. Vivian's smile held. Only if you let it make you careless. Outside, thunder shook the windows. In the mountains, Owen killed his headlights. The SUV vanished into black rain. Hank took the next curve wide, then cut sharply onto an old service road hidden by overgrown brush. Owen followed by memory and nerve. The pickup shot past the turn, brakes screaming too late on wet pavement. For 3 minutes, no one spoke. Then Dad said from the back seat, "That was either stupid or brilliant." Owen kept both hands locked on the wheel. "I'll decide when we're not dead." They reached the abandoned West Project after midnight, a half-built storage complex Dad had once planned to turn into equipment space before county permits stalled. It was ugly, dry, and forgotten. For now, forgotten was safe. When I finally got upstairs and checked my phone, Owen had sent one message. Moved. Alive. Barely. I sat on the edge of the bed until my shaking stopped. Fear is loud. Control is quiet. And that night, the quiet nearly swallowed me whole. The next morning, Vivian became kind. That frightened me more than her cruelty. She found me in the breakfast room where I had been stirring oatmeal I had no intention of eating. Graham sat beside the window reading emails. Sloane poured coffee with both hands wrapped around the mug, as if she were the grieving daughter and I were a guest in her sorrow. Vivian entered wearing a soft gray dress and a face arranged for sympathy. "Mara, dear," she said, "I've been thinking about how hard I may have been on you." Graham looked up. Sloane went still. I lowered my spoon. "Have you?" Vivian sat across from me. "Grief is not tidy. I know that. Perhaps I expected too much grace too soon." It was the closest she had ever come to an apology, which meant it was not one. She reached across the table and touched my wrist. Her hand was cool and dry. "Malcolm called. He found a small box of your father's personal items that came in with the remains. A watch, maybe some papers. He thought you might want them before they're archived." My stomach tightened. Why would Malcolm have Dad's things at Black Ridge? "There's to be a private prayer," Graham said too quickly. "Just family." Reverend Cole offered the old chapel for a quiet moment. Sloane gave me a fragile smile. "It might help you say goodbye properly." Goodbye. They loved that word. It closed doors for them. I looked at each of them and saw the shape of the trap as plainly as if it had been drawn on the table. Vivian offering softness. Graham offering a ride. Sloane offering comfort. Malcolm offering my father's belongings from a death he had helped fake. I let my eyes fill. "I don't know if I can do it." Graham moved beside me. "You don't have to do it alone. I'll drive you." Of course he would. By afternoon, I had made 3 preparations. First, I called Owen from the laundry room while the dryer covered my voice. He listened without interrupting. "It's a trap," he said. "I know." "Well, then don't go." "Well, if I don't, they'll try another way. If I go, they may say what we need." Silence stretched between us. Owen hated it because he understood. The sheriff had pieces, not a cage. Preston could still slip through every gap with money and lawyers. "Wear the black coat," Owen said. "I'll put a tracker in the lining." Second, I met Lena behind a closed antique store off Merrimon Avenue. She looked worse than before, pale and sleepless, but she handed me a thin gold chain with a small pendant. "It records locally," she said. No signal needed. Press twice here. If they use a jammer, it won't matter. I studied her. Why are you risking this? Her mouth twisted. Because Graham called me disposable. I'd like to prove him wrong. I took the chain. No forgiveness passed between us. Only usefulness. Sometimes that is enough. Third, I wrote a letter to Marjorie Bell. If I do not return, do not accept any document signed under my name after today. Walter Ellison is alive. Sloan Ellison, Graham Whitlock, Vivian Whitlock, Preston Vance, and Malcolm Devereaux are involved in a coordinated fraud and attempted murder. My hand did not shake while I signed it. That scared me too. At 5:30, Graham waited by the front door with my coat over his arm. You ready? He asked. No husband had ever sounded more gentle while leading his wife toward danger. Vivian kissed my cheek. Try to open your heart tonight. Sloan hugged me last. Her perfume was familiar, vanilla and cedar. Whatever happens, she whispered, remember, I love you. I almost laughed. Instead, I held it tighter for 1 second because some part of me was saying goodbye to the sister I had invented. The drive toward Black Ridge was quiet. Graham kept both hands on the wheel. Rain clouds gathered low over the mountains, turning the road silver. Halfway there, he pulled onto a narrow shoulder near an empty stretch of woods. Why are we stopping? He looked at me then, and the mask slipped. We need to talk like husband and wife. A black van rolled out from the trees behind us. My pulse slowed until I could hear it in my ears. Graham unlocked the doors. 2 men moved fast. A cloth went over my eyes. Hands grabbed my arms. I kicked once, hard enough to catch someone's shin, and Graham cursed under his breath. Don't make this worse, Mara. As they dragged me into the van, I pressed the pendant twice. Then I stopped fighting. Not because I was surrendering, because I needed every liar in that room to believe I had finally run out of moves. When the blindfold came off, I was sitting in a metal chair under a buzzing warehouse light. My wrists were tied behind me. My ankles were bound to the chair legs. The air smelt of dust, oil, and wet concrete. Somewhere above me, rain ticked against the broken skylight. Preston Vance stood 10 feet away in a charcoal coat, looking less like a criminal than a banker inconvenienced by weather. Malcolm Devereaux paced near a stack of old lumber, wiping sweat from his upper lip with a handkerchief. Vivian sat on a crate as if it were a church pew. Graham leaned against the wall, sleeves rolled up, breathing hard from the effort of betraying me. No one looked surprised to see me awake. Where are the files? Preston asked. No greeting, no performance, just business. I swallowed, letting fear show because fear was useful now. What files? He smiled a small, dead smile. Mara, please. Grief may have made you dramatic, but it has not made you stupid. Graham pushed away from the wall. Tell him where you put them, and this ends. This? I looked at the rope around my wrist. You mean our marriage counseling? His face tightened. Vivian stood. Do not cheapen this with sarcasm. I laughed once, and it came out broken enough to be believable. You helped kidnap me. I helped stop a hysterical woman from destroying 2 families over delusions fed to her by employees and opportunists. Malcolm turned on her. She has recordings. Sheriff Hargrove's office came by the funeral home. They asked for a chain of custody logs. Preston's eyes contorted him. Because you panicked. Well, because you told me the body would never be questioned. The body. My stomach rolled, but I kept my face loose, dazed. Graham stepped closer. Mara, listen to me. You don't understand what your father was doing. He was going to cut everyone out. Me, Mom, Sloan. He was turning you against your own family. My father was my family. His mouth twisted. He owned you. That was the first honest thing he had said all year. Then the warehouse door scraped open. For one foolish heartbeat, hope rose so fast it hurt. Sloane stepped inside wearing a dark raincoat, her hair damp around her face. She looked at me, then at the ropes, then away. "Sloane," I whispered. She did not run to me. She did not ask if I was hurt. She looked at Preston. "Does she have the recording?" Something inside me went silent. Not calm, not peace. A silence so deep it felt like a room after all the windows have shattered. "You knew," I said. Sloane's eyes filled, and for a second, she looked like the sister who had held me after Mom died. "That house was mine too," she said. I stared at her. She stepped closer. "I loved him. I loved you. But love didn't change what I was." "What were you?" Her voice cracked. "His good deed." Vivian looked away, almost bored. Graham stared at the floor. Sloane's tears began falling now. Real tears. That was the cruelest part. "You were his daughter," she said. "I was his good deed, the girl he rescued, the girl people praised him for saving. Do you know what it feels like to spend 27 years grateful for a seat at a table that will never truly be yours? You signed the cremation papers." Her chin trembled. "You copied Dad's trust files." "I was trying to protect what should have been shared." "You gave them his route." She flinched. That was the answer. The rope cut into my wrist as I leaned forward. "You didn't hold the knife, Sloane." Her face crumpled. "You opened the door and smiled while someone else walked in with it." For the first time, she looked angry instead of wounded. "You always had the luxury of being noble. You were never the charity case." "No," I said softly. "I was just the fool who thought my sister loved me more than she envied me." Preston clapped once, sharp and impatient. "Enough. We are out of time." Sloane wiped her face and stepped back into the circle with the others. That was when I understood the final shape of the room. A greedy man, a cowardly husband, a mother who worshipped status, a funeral director who sowed decency, and my sister, the one person who knew exactly where I did not wear armor. Preston pulled a small black device from his coat pocket and set it on a crate. A red light blinked. Then my phone, lying on the table beside my purse, went dark. "No more calls," he said. "No more signals. No more clever little tricks." Graham looked relieved. That told me he had been afraid. Good. Fear makes people sloppy. Preston crouched in front of me, close enough that I could smell mint on his breath. "You are going to tell me where Owen Brooks put the copies. Then you are going to sign a statement admitting you fabricated accusations during an emotional breakdown." Vivian smoothed the front of her coat. "It will sound compassionate. We'll say you needed care, not punishment." "How generous," I whispered. Sloane would not look at me. That hurt, but pain had to wait its turn. Malcolm kept pacing. His shoes scraped the concrete in uneven beats. He was the weakest corner of the room, and Preston knew it, because every few seconds his eyes snapped toward him. So I looked at Malcolm first. "You know he's going to give you up." Malcolm stopped. "What?" I nodded toward Preston. "The funeral records have your name on them. Your signature, your license, your chain of custody logs. Preston paid you, but you carried the urn into the room." Preston's mouth flattened. "Do not answer her." "He won't need to," I said. He'll hand them the payment trail and call you a desperate man with a failing funeral home. Malcolm's face went gray. Then I turned to Graham. And you? I said. You think your mother will save you? Vivian's eyes sharpened. Graham stepped forward. Leave her out of this. She has been rehearsing your sacrifice since you were old enough to disappoint her. My voice shook, but I let it. If the Whitlock name can survive by calling you unstable, greedy, manipulated, she'll do it before Sunday service. That is vile, Vivian said. No, I said. It's familiar. Graham looked at his mother. For the first time, she did not comfort him quickly enough. Then I looked at Sloane. She tried to lift her chin, but her mouth trembled. Preston doesn't need you anymore, I said. The fake amendment has your fingerprints all over it. The cremation authorization has your signature. The access logs show your badge in Dad's office. When this breaks, he'll say you were the grieving adopted daughter who wanted the trust. Sloane's eyes cut to Preston. Preston sighed. You people are embarrassing yourselves. That was the sentence that did it. You people. Not partners, not allies, not family. Tools. Malcolm pointed at him. You said the remains would never be questioned. Preston turned slowly. Lower your voice. You told me it was clean, Malcolm snapped. You told me the county wouldn't look twice after cremation. My pendant rested cold against my collarbone. Recording. Still recording. Graham cursed. Malcolm, shut up. No, Malcolm said, sweating harder now. I am not taking the fall for all of you. Vivian stood. You were paid to handle one thing discreetly. Apparently, even that was beyond you. Malcolm laughed, thin and ugly. Discreet? You called me 3 times before the service to make sure there be no viewing. Vivian's face drained of color. Sloane suddenly said, None of you could have done anything without me. The room froze. She seemed shocked by her own voice. Then anger carried her the rest of the way. I knew Walter's route. I knew he changed meetings that morning. I knew Mara would trust me with the funeral forms. I made it possible. My heart cracked open, but I stayed still. Graham threw up his hands. And I got the signature files. Preston made the plan. Why are we pretending anyone here is innocent? Preston moved fast then. He grabbed Graham by the collar and shoved him against the support beam. You stupid little parasite. Outside, faintly, beyond rain and metal walls, something sounded like tires on gravel. I did not look toward it. Liars do not fall apart when you accuse them. They fall apart when they realize someone else may talk first. Malcolm backed away, hands raised. I'll cooperate. I'll tell Sheriff Hargrove everything. Preston released Graham and turned. His voice went quiet. No, he said. You won't. That was when Graham saw the gun. So did Vivian. So did Sloane. And for the first time that night, every person who had tied me to that chair understood they were locked in the room with the man they had trusted. Preston raised the gun like a man correcting a business error. Nobody breathed. Not Graham, not Vivian, not Malcolm, not Sloane, and not me. The barrel was not pointed at them. It was pointed at Malcolm Devereaux, the weakest liar in the room, and suddenly the most dangerous one. You always were the loose board in the floor, Preston said. Malcolm lifted both hands. Preston, think. I am. That was when the warehouse door exploded inward. Sheriff's Department, drop the weapon. Light flooded the room. Boots hit concrete. Men shouted from every side at once. Preston turned, and for a half a second, I thought he might fire.
Then Owen came through behind the deputies.
Rain dripping from his jacket, eyes locked on me. Preston ran. He made it 6 steps before Hank Morrison swung a crowbar into his path and knocked his legs out from under him. Deputies pinned him face first to the floor. The gun skidded beneath a workbench. Graham did not run. Cowards rarely do when the exit requires courage. He backed into the wall, hands raised, already talking. I didn't know he had a gun. I didn't know it would go this far. Vivian stood frozen, one hand pressed to her pearls. Sheriff Hargrove, she said, her voice shaking into dignity. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. Sheriff Dale Hargrove looked at my tied wrist, then at her. Ma'am, I believe we're past misunderstanding. Malcolm dropped to his knees before anyone touched him. I'll cooperate, he said. I'll give you the ledgers, the payment records, everything. He paid me. Vance paid me. Sloan stood near the door, rain blowing behind her, face empty. For years, my sister had known exactly how to cry. That night, she could not find a single tear. Owen cut the rope from my wrists. The skin beneath was raw and burning. I tried to stand, but my legs failed, and he caught my elbow without making it feel like rescue. You got it? He asked quietly. I touched the pendant at my throat. All of it. The recording did not save me by itself. Nothing in real life is that clean. But it opened the door wide enough for every other piece of evidence to walk through. Hank's toxicology report showed sedatives in his blood. A forensic mechanic found tampering in the SUV's brake line. Lena's files tied Graham and Preston to the altered $8.4 million policy. Malcolm's funeral records showed a mismatched identification number and an unauthorized cremation. Sloan's badge logs placed her inside Dad's private office after the memorial. And the warehouse recording gave them motive, admissions, fear, and names. Still, Preston tried to fight. His lawyer called my father a manipulator, said Walter Ellison had staged his own death to trap business rivals, said grief had made me suggestible, said Owen Brooks had coached me. Men like Preston did not confess because they were caught. They rearranged the room and called the truth a decoration. But 3 days later, Sheriff Hargrove called a private meeting at Ellison Ridge Development. The boardroom filled with directors, senior staff, Marjorie Bell, 2 deputies, and employees who had loved my father enough to come without knowing why. Graham was not there. Vivian was not there. Sloan was not invited. I stood beside Marjorie at the front of the room, my wrists covered with sleeves. Then the door opened. My father walked in. A sound moved through the boardroom that I will never forget. Not a gasp, not a scream, something deeper, like an entire room remembering how to believe in miracles and consequences at the same time. Dad looked thinner, bruised, slower, but alive. The dead man walked in, and every liar in the room forgot how to breathe. Walter Ellison did not give a speech full of thunder. He stood at the head of the table, one hand resting on the chair he had built his life around, and said, I was betrayed by people I trusted. I survived because my daughter refused to let grief make her obedient. Marjorie opened the true trust documents. No temporary trustee chosen by Sloan. No authority for Graham. No Whitlock access. No emergency clause Vivian could bend into a leash. My father's voting interests would be held under protections I controlled, with Marjorie's oversight until he fully recovered. Preston Vance's contracts were suspended pending investigation. Graham's access was permanently revoked. Malcolm's license was frozen. Sloan was removed from every company file, committee, account, and trust conversation. When the meeting ended, Dad took my hand, not as a child, as the woman they had failed to bury. I went back to Whitlock Estate on a clear Thursday morning with 2 deputies waiting outside the gate. Not because I feared the house anymore, because I respected what desperate people do when the performance is over. Vivian opened the door herself. No pearls, no lipstick, no polished southern smile. She looked smaller without an audience. "Mara," she whispered. "Mrs. Whitlock?" I said. Her face tightened at the distance. Graham appeared behind her, unshaven, pale, wearing yesterday's shirt. The man who once walked through rooms like inheritance was his birthright now looked like a boy caught stealing from a church plate. "I came for my things," I said. Vivian's eyes filled. "I only wanted my son to have a future." I looked past her into the house that had taught me to lower my voice. "No, you wanted him to have mine."
Graham stepped forward. "Mara, please." Preston twisted everything. Mom panicked. Sloan was angry. I made mistakes, but I never wanted you dead. I set the divorce papers on the entry table. You weren't manipulated when you left me alone at my father's memorial. You weren't manipulated when you handed Preston my father's signature files. You weren't manipulated when you unlocked that car door. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You're not sorry because you hurt me," I said. "You're sorry because I survived." Vivian covered her face. I walked upstairs, packed 2 suitcases, and left behind every dress she had ever approved of. The trial took months. Preston Vance fought hardest. Men like him believe prison is for people without lawyers. But the evidence held. The altered policy, the shell companies, the brake tampering, Hank's toxicology, Malcolm's ledgers, Lena's recording, my pendant, Sloan's access logs. Preston received the heaviest sentence for conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, insurance fraud, financial fraud, and attempted theft of company assets. Malcolm Devereaux lost his license, his funeral home, and the clean church reputation he had worn like a Sunday suit. Graham pleaded, blamed, cried, and finally learned that charm does not cross-examine well. Vivian tried to look dignified until the prosecutor played the recording of her calling me hysterical while I was tied to a chair. Sloan was last. At her hearing, she turned toward me with red eyes and said she had loved me once. She said she had spent her life feeling second, borrowed, temporary. I believed that she hurt. I also believed she chose. "You had a family," I told her. "You traded it for a fake will." Dad cried that day, but not for the verdict. He cried because grief is complicated when someone you saved becomes someone you must survive. Later, he told me, "Maybe I gave Sloan a roof and never made her feel chosen." I took his hand. "Maybe, but pain doesn't give anyone the right to become a weapon." He nodded. Walter Ellison never returned to running the company full-time. A professional board handled operations. Marjorie stayed close. Owen kept the records clean. I held Dad's voting interest and learned, slowly, how to protect a legacy without letting it swallow my life. Lena left town after testifying. We did not become friends. But I stopped needing her to be a villain. One evening in late fall, I made dinner for Dad at the house overlooking the Blue Ridge. Chicken soup, garlic bread, and apple pie from Mom's old recipe card. Dad ate 2 slices and pretended that was doctor approved. After he went to bed, I took off my wedding ring. I placed it in a small wooden box, locked it, and set it at the back of a drawer. Not because I wanted to remember Graham, because I wanted to remember the woman who walked out. Outside, the North Carolina sky was full of stars. I had survived a false urn, a false marriage, a false sister,
and a house full of beautiful manners hiding ugly hearts. But I still had the one thing they tried hardest to take: my own voice. Some doors close because life is done punishing you. And some women do not rise from the ashes. They rise from the truth. Life has a way of teaching us that family is not proven by blood, last names, or pretty words, but by what people protect when no one is watching. If this story moved you, please leave a like for the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us where you are listening from. Thank you for staying until the end. May you be healthy, safe, and strong enough to walk away from any room that tries to silence you. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you again in the next story on Revenge Glow.